Here we are again. I have decided I'm going to sit down and put my thoughts out a little bit on a kind of some higher level thinking about what we've seen in Ottawa in the past few weeks, and at higher level in terms of the pandemic itself, and where we're at. I've been saying that the pandemic is a process, and right now we're all acting as if life is a static thing. But if anything that we've learned over the last couple of years is that we can be going through dramatic change at any moment. And many of us are not prepared. It's a surprise to us. I remember when we were going into lockdown in the middle of March of 2020. I'd been telling people for 2 months that there was a pandemic. On the 23rd of January was the Chinese New Year. Immediately following that weekend, they locked down China. 800 million people were locked down. And there was pictures coming out of Wuhan of deserted streets. Maybe you remember this, but maybe you don't. Because plenty of people that I talked to in the couple of days before we were locked down saying, hey, this might be the last legal hug we can get for a while, and you should be prepared. And people looking at me like I had two heads. The pandemic is a process, right? There's a biological process that goes along with this that we're seeing, but there's an intense social and societal process that we go through as well, and we're going through. Our Prime Minister a few weeks ago called the protesters, well, even before they got to Ottawa, these were misogynists. These were people that wasn't sure if he was going to be able to tolerate them. Had been speaking negatively, saying that the anti-vaxxers were mostly racists and misogynists. That's an emotional play. Okay, it's an emotional play designed to elicit your emotions and elicit your disgust. And one of the problems of coming out of a pandemic is our fear and our disgust instinct. And we're in a very dangerous part of the process at the moment where disgust can be exploited to move political bodies. And it's happening right in front of us. A year and a half ago, Randy Hillier. Now, I think Randy Hillier is getting censured in the provincial legislature. He's an independent member of provincial parliament in Lanark County. And he's managed to make headlines across country and around the world for standing up, being arrested for refusing to wear masks and having protests in the middle of high transmission, relatively high fatality, high mortality rates, case fatality, CFR, right, of Delta. And we all kind of make this compact, right? Like, we agreed as a society broadly that, hey, there's a pandemic coming, even, though it took some of us longer than others to figure that out, that we were going to have to make some sacrifices, not just to protect ourselves, but we were going to have to make sacrifices to protect our community members, our fellows, our other citizens, okay? And I think that is a fair compromise. Particularly given in the early pandemic, we had no idea, we didn't have a vaccine for a year. We had no idea what the seriousness of, we were initially getting reports of 3, 4, 5% case fatality rates. That's like 1 in 20, 1 in 30 people dying from this disease. And the early reports were a lot scarier than what they ended up as. Right? Yeah, okay, New York City got smoked because COVID was there long before the lockdowns happened. They were spreading in the public transit systems and in the elevators in high-rise buildings, and New York is a global city, and so it was both highly infected and it spread COVID. Okay, there's horror stories of the healthcare workers who sacrificed during that period of time, and the refrigerated morgues. The when I was tree planting, we used to call them the reefers, the refrigerated trucks and trailers that were where bodies were being stacked because there was no room in the morgues and no facilities to house them. That's terrible. It was horrifying. Okay, and then we got the vaccine. Very excited. I was happy to as soon as I could get my vaccines, I got my vaccines. I'm triple vaxxed. And you know, I'm fine with it. I know that there's risks in anything. I will take the risks of the vaccine over the risk of Delta. Okay? But now we're another two sets of lockdowns since. And we were told to be terrified of Omicron. But Omicron was our lockdown measures in retrospect, and the severity of those lockdowns and those restrictions were clearly an overreach. We have to, as a society, accept that people die. And that's a natural part of life. Now, when they're preventable, when we've got 3, 4, 5% potentially case fatality rate and unknown long-term consequences of SARS-CoV-2, by all means, let's protect citizenry. But when the case fatality rate with Omicron is 0.3%, which is in the range, it's a bad flu year. Okay, 0.35% case fatality rate for the flu is a bad flu year. And normally between 0.2% case fatality rate and 0.3% case fatality rate for the flu every year. Omicron was 0.3%. Yes, it was more contagious. Yes, it infected more people. Yes, it had the potential to overwhelm hospitals. But our hospitals had no surge capacity, thanks to decades of cuts to nurses and hospital infrastructure. And this is always a place you're going to go to cut. Well, we spent too much on hospitals. Well, what did we cut? We cut our surge capacity. We cut our ability to deal with that, and then all of society had to pay the price of lockdowns. This is part of the process, right? Now, part of that process is public opinion and people's willingness to make sacrifices and people's willingness to go along with the government narrative. Well, it started with that couple of percentage of people on one end of a spectrum, the anti-vaxxers, and we always kind of knew that the anti-vaxxers would be a problem, right? Like, because they don't like vaccines. And there was a tremendous amount of disinformation spread about vaccines. But in spite of that, we have almost 90% of Canadians eligible for vaccines having got at least one shot. We're in the high 80s having 2+ shots. Okay? In the meantime, the severity of COVID in its variants has diminished dramatically. That actually is kind of like, you know, you need a tissue. It's the body aches and the sniffles. It's not fun. But all of our lives, we have dealt with the spread of the annual flu. And it's a risk when we leave the house in the wintertime that we could get the flu. We could also get hit by a bus. We could, have been exposed to environmental contagions and toxins and develop illness. That's part of life. Now, I'm not saying kill granny, okay? The Texas and Florida policies just horrified me. Where an actual Texas politician said, our seniors have to be able to make sacrifices with their lives for the economy. And that's too far. So we've got a small contingent of people, anti-vax or anti-mandates, who are pro-freedom, who no matter what are going to be oppositional. Maybe that's 3, 4, 5% of the population. Okay? Part of this process is we have the other end of a spectrum where there is a cohort of people that now are Puritans. They're Puritans. You must wear a mask or you're a murderer. And their level of comfort and their level of comfort with risk, and I've spent my whole career talking to people about risk and risk in life-changing decisions, pros and cons. And I know that there are people who have on this anti-vax side of the spectrum, these are high-risk individuals, high-risk tolerance. Okay, they're willing to take on the risk themselves to avoid having the government tell them what to do. Okay? 4 or 5% of people. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the Puritans, absolutists. Everybody else must protect me, you filthy bastards. They have a high disgust sensitivity, and their fear about others contaminating them is very high. And they don't want any risk at all. Now, are the anti-vaxxers realistic? No. Are the Puritans realistic? No. We're in the process of pandemic. Okay, it's a process. What's been happening over on the side of the spectrum of anti-vax is we've had people legitimately who are following the science, and I've followed the science all the way through this, who are saying, you know, we're kind of at a place here where society, we're going to have to accept risk and get on with our lives. That's the only way to get back to normal. We're going to have to accept risk. We're going to have to take it on ourselves and accept it. Right now, the government is telling us what to do. So we've got a political spectrum, right? The anti-vaxxers and the Puritans, the freedom people and the lockdown people, kind of like a barbell in terms of their population. Okay, we might say that the anti-vaxxers were like a tiny bubble over here for most of the pandemic, and the process was most good citizens fit into, okay, I'm going to make reasonable sacrifice. But at the fringe of this are the Puritans, right? These are the absolutists. Wash your hands 5 times a day. Like there's some obsessive compulsive component. And we may be talking about 3 or 4 or 5% of the population. Okay? Meanwhile, over here, this group of people, as the process of pandemic has been unfolding, has been growing. Not because anti-vaxxers are growing in number, but because people who are starting to say, okay, these restrictions are too much. And we need legitimate and reasonable propositions here socially so that we can balance out the needs and concerns of everybody. And that group of people has been growing, and it's not going to stop growing. It's not. That's the process of pandemic. We're in a position now where a growing number of people in Canada and around the world want the government out of our business, want to take on and accept risk ourselves, make our own decisions. That's what we want. And I say we because now I'm part of that much larger group. I'm triple vaccinated, but at this point I think that it's time. And that is a legitimate political and social view. We can't stop the wave of people who are feeling this way. You might not feel this way right now. You might still be afraid. You want to stay in your home. You might still perceive the world as a scary place. You might want to wear your mask. That's entirely up to you. You might want to protect yourself. That's fine. But the imposition of behaviors and choices and mandates on the rest of the citizenry because of a small group of people's intolerance to any risk is unacceptable in a free society. That's what the truckers' protest was ultimately about. It was, first of all, symbolic. Okay, yes, perhaps started with a group of truckers, while the rest of the world was tearing down mandates and recognizing that Omicron wasn't as scary as it had been billed. It didn't have the same impacts. It didn't have the case fatality rate. It spread more easily, but had far fewer problems and complications. Like 10 times less than Delta are the numbers. 3% case fatality rate to a 0.3% case fatality rate is a 10-time reduction. That growing cohort of people, and there are repeated polls here. Someone online told me the whole selective questions and barely misrepresentation, blah, blah, blah. 2/3 of Canadians want to get their lives back. It's certainly a majority at this point. And the truckers inspired people all across the country, not anti-vaxxers, but people whose blood had been slowly boiling through the sacrifices and accumulated pain suffered during the pandemic. Those people made sacrifices, most of them and many of them willingly, for the sake of our communities and our country and our friends and family and fellows. But at a certain point, the blood starts to boil. And this sentiment spreads like a contagion, like a virus itself, spreads to more and more people. And when the trucker is pushing back against unscientific cross-border vax mandates that were being imposed even as the rest of the world was pulling restrictions and stopping these mandates and opening up and dropping boundaries and barriers, our Prime Minister arbitrarily and unscientifically imposed these mandates on a small group of people. And they're upset. Fair to be upset for them. Fair to speak out to them. And as they started mobilizing, they picked up other people. They picked up the other people who've been dealing with. They lost businesses. They lost income. They missed saying goodbye to dying loved ones in the hospital. They haven't been able to travel freely. You all know this. Maybe you have young kids at home and you tried to balance working with getting your kids educated online, and maybe some of those kids have done okay, but maybe some of them are really suffering. We have made big sacrifices as a society, and it is normal and reasonable to expect at a certain point in the process that a momentum is going to build and is building about getting over it. Let's just get on with life. And that's normal. A person of any intelligence, or at least I would think the minimum acceptable level of intelligence required to run a country, should be able to figure this out. Should be able to have that perspective that at a certain point, for a certain group of people, and a growing group of people, are going to feel like enough is enough. That's normal. But for some reason, perhaps our Prime Minister is one of those Puritans, those disgust-sensitive people who is afraid of everything and everyone and washes his hands 12 times a day. Maybe that's him. I don't know. But to fail to recognize the shifting sentiments, normal, that can only be expected at this point in a pandemic after 2 years of frustration and fear and uncertainty and dramatically shifting political landscapes and social landscapes and all of the sacrifices that we've made and change, for people to say, I'm done. That's why, as the truckers were driving across Canada, the tens and hundreds of thousands of people stood on the roadways in small towns and populated the overpasses with banners and flags and food supplies and financial donations and all of the support that the truckers received across the country. It's not the vid. I had a friend come up from Toronto the weekend of the first protest. And the protest is not a homogenous group. Okay, I made the analogy before. When the circus comes to town, you've got the big top. And you're going to have the bearded lady and the juggler and the grifter playing 3-card Monte and the priest and the and the the freak show. Okay, it's not a homogenous group. She drove up, and I had recommended taking a northern highway route to avoid the trucks. She said she was brought to tears along the way. Because the convoy was moving a bit slower, she caught up to them and ended up driving along the end of the convoy, all the trucks and cars and Canada flags and all the overpasses and the thousands and thousands of people. And she was moved to tears by this. Finally, a symbolic gesture that reflected the frustrations of so many Canadians, right? Even now, after the protest has been cleared in Ottawa, the numbers we have, about 20% of Canadians, or 8 million people, supported the truckers' protest. Now, is that because they're anti-vaxxers? Do we have that many Nazis in Canada? Are they all misogynists? Ottawa Citizen made inferences. They published an article that inferred that these were wife beaters, and they had the same kind of attitudes towards people, racists. And really, we have that many misogynists and Nazis in Canada? I don't think so. Now, supporting the protest is one thing, but supporting the drop of mandates is entirely another. Most Canadians at this point, multiple polls, majority of Canadians support the end to all mandates. This is normal. I'm finding it very terrifying that political leadership now has assumed warlike powers. I got a list in my office. I work in the financial services industry. I'm client facing. We got the comply or be denied communications from the Ontario Securities Commission and the blacklist of people whose accounts needed to be frozen without due process, without actual evidence, right? Only the assertions of the government, without a warrant. That we have now suspended civil liberties. And you know what? You cannot believe at this point anything the Prime Minister says. Oh, we're going to suspend your civil liberties, but that doesn't mean we're suspending your civil liberties. That kind of double talk is about as fair and accurate as him saying that there was one Nazi flag that showed up in a crowd of 50,000 people, that everybody, not just here, but everybody who agreed with the truckers and their end mandates demands are Nazis. It's a simpleton that believes this narrative. But we know from history that totalitarian regimes and oppressive governments figure out that you just repeat the lie over and over and over again. And you get enough simpletons in society who are going to subscribe to this. In order to get through this process, we have to start respecting that people we're going to have divergent views. We are going to become more polarized. And that polarization has to be managed. not inflamed. Trying to unpack the lies. I mean, here's what I saw. We went to the protest and I was skeptical. I didn't know what we'd be encountering. I was a little uncertain. And I'm a traveler. And I make the distinction between a traveler and a tourist. A tourist goes somewhere to see what they want to see. They've got their preconceptions, but really it's, the asshole American who shows up in France and expects everybody to talk English, right? A traveler goes to see what there is there, what's there. I'm a traveler. I've traveled into all kinds of situations I didn't understand, and I got to see what was there. And so as a traveler, I went to Parliament Hill with friends. Not the big top. We're not the main event. We're a sideshow. Talking to people about another political issue that affects us in Canada. Because there's a crowd, and we haven't had crowds allowed in 2 years. And I got up there, it's horns, bloody loud. It was like Canada Day downtown. There was that many people, for one thing. There was as many people on Parliament Hill and in the Byward Market as I've seen on any Canada Day I've been to. It's a lot of people. Got home at the end of the day, and the narrative is the white supremacists and Nazis and Confederate flags. Not the singing, the dancing, the "Oh Canada," the hugging, the fist bumping, the calls for freedom. I did kind of have this sense that, the freedom cry, freedom, was a bit like William Wallace in Braveheart as he's being executed. Okay, it's strange and surreal. But after 2 years of frustration, people were singing and dancing. It was an opportunity, a moment of potential symbolism and power in the nation's capital that a politician could have said, "We're not quite there yet, everybody. We're so glad you came. Let's sing the national anthem together. There is a plan. We have a plan for dropping all the mandates and for getting on with life, and we're glad you came. Your concerns and your feelings at this point in the process of pandemic are valid." And what did we get? I was in the Rideau Centre, the main shopping centre, downtown Ottawa, on the first Saturday and Sunday. It was minus 25 degrees Celsius, and it was windy. It was very cold. And there were as many people downtown as there were on any Canada Day in Ottawa I've ever seen. People traveled across the country. People, those tens of thousands of people with money, were in the mall. Now, I work downtown. I've worked downtown for years. And when the pandemic started, everybody got sent home. Who works downtown? Government workers. Lots of government executives. We had the Shopify, some of the richest people in Canada, with significant real estate holdings and significant disposable dollars. There was a whole construction, retail infrastructure being built downtown to accommodate new restaurants and liquor stores and grocery stores and services that were built and came in because there was so much money downtown Ottawa. So we've got the government, we've got the Shopify people, some other technology people downtown, the support, the law firms, the accounting firms, the professionals downtown. All those professionals, the ones who make the money, the EX in the government that are making $1.10, $1.20, $1.30 plus bonuses, plus overtime, etc., those government people, those technology people whose shares are worth millions, they're gone. Gone. Downtown Ottawa is a ghost town. Okay, after 6 o'clock on a weeknight, downtown Ottawa was always dead. It was Ottawa downtown is boring as fuck. The Byward Market's a little bit more youthful with the university students and the University of Ottawa taking up some of the entertainment dollars, disposable dollars of those kids. But all of the money, all of the people downtown Ottawa are gone, have been gone for 2 years. My barber shop closed. My dry cleaners successively closed, 3 of them. Restaurants have closed and turned over. Gyms have closed and turned over. Economically, downtown Ottawa is devastated. It is destroyed. It's a smoldering ruin. Truckers come to town with money. Those protesters driving across the country, they brought cash. I was inside the Rideau Centre on both days to warm up, to pass through. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of people in the mall. Flags hanging over the railings from the 2nd and 3rd story. People leaning over. Yes, shouting freedom. Singing "O Canada." Lined up neatly and in an orderly fashion for the LCBO, for the bathrooms, for the food courts, for Tim Hortons, for services and to spend dollars. You know what? Lots of them weren't wearing masks. I wasn't wearing a mask. And they closed the Rideau Centre. Not only closed the Rideau Centre, the authorities shut down bank machines. They closed other retail, grocery stores, and LCBOs and resources for anybody who was at the protest. Shut it all down. Blame the truckers, of course, because they're racist and misogynist and they're violent and all of the smears, the snarl words, because they're intimidating people and they're abusing people and there's violence, etc., etc. These are all lies. Authorities shut down retail and shut down businesses downtown Ottawa to deny warmth, toilets, and food access to protesters. It's a crowd control measure. And you're still perfectly entitled to say, well, that's justifiable. Okay. Then let's put the responsibility where the responsibility lies. These are orders from the City of Ottawa, from the police, from crowd management. We've decided to close these facilities to deny these protesters food, warmth, and toilets. So all these businesses are shut down. It's minus 25 out. Some people have driven 3,000 kilometers in their cars across the prairies in January to sleep in their cars, are denied access to toilets, warmth, and food. Then, within a couple of days, Monday media, Tuesday media, there are the hate crime reports. Well, someone defecated by a building where there was a rainbow flag in the window. This is a hate crime. All public toilets are shut down. No places to find warmth. Businesses ordered closed. Bank machines shut down. Liquor stores closed. Grocery stores closed. I can't imagine the humiliation of being a person having to relieve themselves in minus 25 next to a building because The government has determined and decided that you're a racist, you're a misogynist, your views are unacceptable, and that you're a danger to society, and we're going to deny you the basics of human dignity: warmth, toilet, and food. Instead of having the intellectual maturity and being able to meet what I would consider the minimum acceptable requirement to be a leader of a country, to recognize that a pandemic is a process. And at a certain point, people are going to change their views. How is this not expected? And what's the strategy in place to deal with changing views? Did we just increase the number of people that we call misogynists and Nazis and rapists who disagree with the Puritans? On Saturday and Sunday, our little circus sideshow, we talked to hundreds of people. I had moments, and I've been to a couple Canada Day celebrations. I tend not to be the overt, demonstrative, ritualistic person. And I can go along and I can wave my flag on Canada Day. Never prouder to be Canadian than being on Parliament Hill with the truckers. I've never been so proud to be Canadian. To live in a free country where people can bring their views to protest, to speak to the government, to ask to be heard. And that we have peaceful assembly here. Never been so ashamed of being Canadian in the last couple of weeks with the behavior of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals and the NDP. These are the people for decades. These are the politicians, or at least the political parties, where I thought that there was compassion and a willingness to understand other people's diverse views and needs. The CBC said it was the Russians, first of all. Jagmeet Singh said they were all racists. Trudeau said they have unacceptable views. This is like, I can't fathom, is this a political miscalculation, an inept assertion on the pulse of Canadians at this point in the process of pandemic? Those people, those anti-vaxxers, right? Like, we know that small cohort of people, we can say that they hold conspiratorial views. I talked to some people that were innocent but paranoid, right? Fearful but like naive, not having the words to be able to articulate an intuition that they have. And yeah, I met some anti-vaxxers. I met tons of people who are vaccinated, more than not. Canadians from all over. The media just ate up the lies. Ate them up. Windows smashed in at a coffee shop. Truckers. As it turned out, it was drunk local teens. Attempted arson of a building. First of all, the fire wasn't reported until the next day. So it certainly didn't go very far. Second of all, the people were wearing COVID masks, which tends to suggest, well, look, these are unidentified individuals, and there is no causal reason to tie them to the truckers. From what I'd heard and understood, there are undesirable elements living in this building. Drug dealing, drug using. This is not a high class dwelling with a concierge. I'm not making an excuse for it. I'm trying to put things in context. Claims of harassment. It's possible. Masks, particular. There have been increasing numbers of confrontations about masks in public spaces all over the country and all over the world. Time to take the masks off. And I don't think people should be telling others to take their masks off any more than I think people should be telling others to wear them at this point. Two kilometers from downtown in a grocery store, trucks apparently with flags on them, pickup trucks, and a group of men, unidentified, yelling at people about masks. My wife was accosted, felt uncomfortable. We have used in Canada, if you don't know the origin story of CSIS, CSIS was formed to create a layer of protection and a boundary on the types of work performed between the RCMP and the Canadian population. RCMP had demonstrated over decades that it did not deserve the powers that it had. That they used agents provocateurs, that they kept blacklists, that they infiltrated the NDP in the 1960s with agents provocateurs and spies to get the names of people who were contributing to the New Democratic Party in terms of money, time, and energy. They kept these blacklists. Political undesirables. Agents provocateurs. Unfortunately, standard operating procedure for police forces all over the world. There are reasons to not trust police. In events like this. And people will dress in plain clothes and attempt to stir up trouble, conflict, or act out violence that can be blamed on the protesters. This happened during BLM riots in the US. It's happened at the OECD conference in Toronto, the Quebec City protests, the Seattle protests, the APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Conference protests in Vancouver in the late 90s. There were undercover operations by the police and counterintelligence. This is a part of our intelligence infrastructure. When the government wants to smear somebody, they can and they do. So when somebody who's denied food, toilet, and warmth and can't find a bathroom within square miles, toilets outside of a building in a snowbank, and it happens to have a rainbow flag in the window. This is a level, right? When kids drunk smash out the window of a coffee shop a kilometer away from the protest site, when unattributable violence or crime happens, You know, like, here's one that made the rounds a lot. It was the homeless shelters, the food kitchen. There was a skirmish at the food kitchen. Well, if you're a resident of Ottawa and you've ever been on St. Patrick or Murray Street or George Street, where the rehab centers are, where the wet room is. The wet room is it's not the right word for it, but basically incurable alcoholics are given a regular portion of sherry to maintain so that they're not in the community causing problems, and any of those places at 30% of the time has a police and ambulance out in front of them. There are constantly issues between the people who patronize these services, and they're important services. And I actually have a good deal of compassion for people struggling with mental illness and with addiction. And, you know, they're on the margins of our society, and I'm proud that we take care of them. But to report that there was a skirmish at one of these places and attribute it to the truckers, again, a kilometer away from the protest, is asinine. We got these scare narratives in such a proportion. In rhetorical analysis, there's something called a Gish Gallop. A Gish Gallop is when a person you're debating gives you an itemized list that's 15 things wrong and says you've got 2 minutes to debunk them. It's a similar structure in propaganda where you just inundate the public consciousness with lies and distortions and horror stories, especially ones that generate disgust. I'm sad for our country. I'm scared for our country at this point. I'm scared for my fellow citizens. I am personally scared. About the degree to which the government can now go. The little sideshow that I participate in has to do with gender ideology. Bill C-4 passed unanimously through corrupt Parliament and Senate in the fall of last year. Bill C-4 is the anti-conversion therapy bill. Fine. I'm okay with saying it's not okay to send people to pray the gay away. We don't do that in Canada anyway, in any meaningful way. Conversion therapy. If you're same-sex attracted, we've as a country, we've got beyond that 20 years ago. And gay and lesbian, bisexual in our communities, this is normal. This is accepted. It's only the very fringe that has any issue whatsoever with this. But there's a new phenomena, transgenderism, where the narrative or the idea is that you can be born in the wrong body. This is being taught to children in Canada starting in grade 1. That you have a body, a biological sex, and you have a gender identity. And the two don't have to be the same. So children who still believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, who believe that if you put on a cape you can be Batman, are being taught in school that you might be a girl when you're a biological boy, or you might be a boy when you're a biological girl. Sounds kind of strange, right? But in Canada now, the law says that if you're a man, and I self-declare as a woman, suddenly, Shannon, I'm gonna take on the gender identity of the name that I was born with. Shannon, of course, is a girl's name, and I'm now a girl. You have to treat me like a woman and extend all the privileges to me that a woman might have. This allows me to go into women's safe spaces. I can go into, if I'm raped, I can go to a women's rape crisis center. If I'm, like there was a case in the States where a non-binary camp counselor was allowed to sleep in a dormitory. This is a biological male, was allowed to sleep in a camp dormitory with 10 and 11-year-old girls because they're non-binary, and to say no would be to discriminate against that person. Well, you know, I've worked in very competitive environments over the years, and if you give somebody a incentive, corruption, there will be corrupt intent that manifests towards achieving the incentive. Not everybody, but people will try and game the system. So one of these self-declarations, self-ID declarations in Alberta, a young man said, "I'm a woman," changed his papers to say he was a she in order to get lower car insurance. Right? People game the system. And self-ID laws are bad. And teaching children gender ideology in school at 6, 7 years old when they're still believe in Santa Claus and can actually believe that a boy can become a girl or a girl can become a boy, especially when that given by an authority figure, is wrong. I believe it's wrong. But I'm saying this on YouTube in public, and that is a crime. That makes me a criminal. In Canada, because of the laws the Liberals have passed. I'm afraid that now it has been clearly demonstrated that if you disagree with the government, that the government can bring down tremendous force to bear upon you without due process, without a trial, without charges. Seize your bank account, seize your property, take away your freedom as an individual. I don't know where you are on the spectrum of beliefs and sentiments at this point in the process of pandemic. Maybe you're a Puritan. If you're a Puritan, I would ask that you recognize that not everybody is going to be as puritanical as you. And if you want to wash your hands 5 times a day, carry around your hand sanitizer, wear your N95 masks, no one's going to stop you. But we live in a free country. We get to make choices for ourselves. Medical, health, careers, education, what we wear, the language we speak, the religion we practice. That's a free country. A person of another religion in Canada doesn't get to tell me what religion is okay or not. A person who's a Puritan, a germaphobe, doesn't get to tell the rest of Canadians what they can or can't do anymore. It's over.